The rejection letter didn't hurt. What hurt was the timestamp. 11:47 a.m. 14 minutes after I walked out of that building. They didn't even wait until evening. They didn't even pretend to think about it. My name is Arian Mehta, 26 years old, 3 years of job hunting, 41 rejections, and a mother at home who still bragged to the neighbors that her son was about to land something big. I didn't have the heart to tell her that something big kept slipping through my fingers like smoke. The position was at Nexera, a mid-sized tech consulting firm that everyone in the industry knew by one reputation. Once you got in, you were set for life. Great pay, great benefits, a name on your resume that opened every door afterward. I had spent 4 months preparing. 4 months of mock interviews, case studies, researching the company's culture, memorizing the founder's philosophy. 4 months of becoming, on paper, exactly what they said they wanted. I wasn't nervous walking in. I was ready. But the moment I sat across from the interviewer, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Priya Sood, something shifted in the room. I felt it the way you feel a drop in temperature before a storm. She looked at me the way people look at something they've already decided to throw away. She smiled. She asked her questions. I answered every single one correctly. I know I did. I could see it in her eyes. That brief flash of surprise when my answers hit exactly where they needed to. She wasn't expecting confidence. She was expecting to be bored. But the flash disappeared quickly. By the end, the smile was back, polished, practiced, and empty. "We'll be in touch," she said. 14 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I sat in my car for a long time, not crying, just sitting, staring at the building, watching other people walk in and out, watching the world continue like I wasn't slowly dissolving inside my own chest. That's when I noticed her. She was standing near the entrance, holding a folder, looking at her phone with a frustrated expression. Mid-20s. Professional blazer. The kind of person who looked like they belonged inside that building. She caught me staring and didn't look away. Instead, she walked straight to my car and knocked on the window. I rolled it down. "You just came out of the Nexera interview, didn't you?" she said. Not a question. An observation. Her name was Zara. She'd been rejected from Nexera 3 times. But she knew things about the company that I didn't. Things that weren't on their website. Things that weren't in any LinkedIn post or Glassdoor review. She knew because her older sister had worked there, briefly, before leaving under circumstances Zara described only as complicated. She told me something that night, over terrible vending machine coffee in a parking lot, that cracked my understanding of the world in half. Nexera had a system. A hidden one. Their interviewers, specifically Ms. Priya Sood, operated on a set of unconscious biases so deeply embedded in the company's culture that no HR policy could touch them. Male candidates with certain profiles, young, ambitious, slightly nervous, were flagged internally as threatening, as potential competition for the senior positions controlled by a tight circle of people who had no intention of being replaced. The rejection wasn't about competence. It never was. So they reject men on purpose? I asked. Zara shook her head. Not men. Specifically men who remind them of someone. You probably walked in looking hungry. Looking like you actually wanted it. That's the trigger. I didn't know what to do with that. I went home. I ate dinner with my mother who asked how it went, and I said fine, still waiting. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until 3 a.m. And then an idea formed that I am not proud of. But I followed it anyway. Zara had mentioned one thing in passing, almost accidentally, that I couldn't stop thinking about. She said the only candidate she knew who had successfully gotten through Ms. Sood's interviews in the past year was a woman named Anika Sharma. Quiet, confident, non-threatening, the kind of presence that felt collaborative rather than competitive. Sood apparently responded completely differently to that energy. The idea was insane. I knew it was insane. But I'd been sitting in the wreckage of 41 rejections for 3 years. Sanity had stopped feeling like a luxury I could afford. I called Zara the next morning. I told her what I was thinking. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "I'll help you." What followed was 2 weeks I will never fully be able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Zara had connections, a makeup artist friend, a wardrobe stylist who owed her a favor, and a frighteningly detailed understanding of how gender presentation shifted perception in professional environments. She wasn't doing this as a game. She was doing it as an experiment. She'd been studying this for years. She wanted to prove something. I became Anika. Not a caricature. Not a costume. Zara was methodical and precise. She said the goal wasn't to look like a woman. It was to carry the specific professional energy that Ms. Sood responded to. The soft confidence. The collaborative language. The way of taking up space without threatening anyone else's. We practiced for hours. The way I sat. The way I introduced myself. The particular way I paused before answering questions. Thoughtful. Not calculating. I looked in the mirror the morning of the second interview and felt something I hadn't expected. I felt calm. Not the brittle, over-prepared calm of someone who'd memorized answers. A different kind. Like I'd stepped outside the version of myself that had been carrying 3 years of failure and rejection and quiet shame. And for just one day, I didn't have to be him. I walked into Nexera at 10 a.m. Ms. Priya Sood looked up from her desk and smiled. And this time, I felt it immediately. The smile was different. Warmer. Genuine even. She gestured to the seat across from her with an openness that hadn't existed in our first meeting. She asked the same questions. I gave the same answers. Technically identical to what I had said 6 weeks earlier as Aryan. But the room felt different. She leaned forward when I spoke. She laughed once at something I said. She asked follow-up questions, real ones, not the polite, dismissive kind. When I explained a complex case study solution, she nodded slowly and said, "That's a really elegant approach. We don't hear that kind of systems thinking often." I had said the exact same thing 6 weeks ago, word for word. I had rehearsed it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. She hadn't nodded then. She'd written something on her notepad and moved on. The interview lasted 47 minutes. The first one had lasted 19. I walked out of the building into the afternoon sun and stood on the pavement and didn't know whether to feel triumphant or sick. My phone buzzed 3 hours later. Nexera was pleased to offer Anika Sharma the position of junior strategy consultant. I stood in Zara's apartment and we stared at the email together, and neither of us said anything for a very long time. Here is where I thought the story would end, with a clean, satisfying moral about bias and broken systems and one man's strange victory over an unfair world. I thought I would turn down the offer, maybe send an anonymous letter to the company exposing what had happened, maybe write about it somewhere. I thought I had done what I set out to do, prove that the system was rigged. But then Zara said something that stopped me cold. "What if you took the job?" I looked at her. "That's not possible." "Why not?" I opened my mouth to list the obvious reasons. The deception, the legal implications, the impossibility of sustaining it. But she held up her hand. "I'm not saying live as a woman forever. I'm saying, what if Anika shows up for the first week, settles in, lets the team form an impression, and then Aryan Mehta transfers in as a replacement, a colleague, and we see what happens to the same person, same skills, same work, when the team already respects the work without knowing who did it." It was the most reckless idea I had ever heard. I said yes. The first week as Anika was the strangest experience of my life, but not for the reasons I expected. It wasn't the performance that was strange. It was the work. I was good at it. Genuinely, visibly good, and for the first time in 3 years, people could see it. My team responded. They included me. They asked for my input. When I flagged a problem in a project timeline, my manager actually paused the meeting and said, "Can you walk us through that?" Nobody had ever said that to me before. In any job. In any room. And on the last day of the first week, I went home and sat with that feeling and realized something devastating. It wasn't the bias alone that had been breaking me. It was what the bias had done to me over time. 3 years of being overlooked had made me carry myself like someone who expected to be overlooked. The hunger Zara had described, the thing that triggered Ms. Sood, it wasn't confidence. It was desperation wearing confidence's mask. And everyone in every room had felt it even if they couldn't name it. Anika wasn't just a disguise. She was the version of me that hadn't been crushed yet. I never went back as Aryan. I couldn't. Not because the experiment had proven its point. It had, devastatingly, completely, but because I had been offered the job under a false name, and there was no clean way out that didn't end in legal consequences, humiliation, or both. I quit. By email. Anika Sharma cited a family emergency and withdrew. I never told Nexera what had happened. I've thought about it every day since. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing I can't resolve no matter how many times I turn it over. Ms. Priya Sood, the woman who rejected me in 19 minutes and hired me in 47, she wasn't a villain. She was a person operating inside a system so old and so normalized that she couldn't see her own patterns any more than she could see the air she breathed. She genuinely believed she was making the right calls. She believed she was good at her job. And that is the part that haunts me, not the unfairness, the unconsciousness of it. 6 months later, I got a job at a different company. Smaller, less prestigious. I walked in as Aryan Mehta, exhausted, honest, and somehow lighter than I'd been in years. The interviewer was a quiet man named Rajan who asked me one question I'd never been asked before. What do you think you're still learning about yourself? I almost laughed. I almost cried. I said something careful and professional and partially true. But inside, I thought, I'm learning that the person who gets to be confident, calm, and fully seen in a room, that person isn't a different gender. It's just me. On a day when nobody has spent 3 years telling me, without words, that I don't belong. I got the job. And on my first day, when my new manager introduced me to the team, I noticed something on the whiteboard behind him, a name written in blue marker as part of a project list. Anika Sharma. I stopped breathing. I looked closer. It was a different Anika Sharma. A real one. A consultant from another firm brought in for a short-term project. She was standing near the window, talking to a colleague, completely unaware that her name had once been borrowed by a desperate stranger trying to prove something that turned out to be both simpler and more complicated than he ever imagined. She turned at that moment, caught my eye, smiled, politely the way strangers do. I smiled back, and I thought, she has no idea how much her name once taught me about my own.